Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my new great friend, Danny McKnight, Colonel, United States Army Ranger.
Well, my take on my book is the first three chapters focus on leadership, because that's the reason the book is Streets of Mogadishu. Leadership at its best, political correctness at its worst. Leadership, folks, is a lost art in our country. And we need to wake up and get back in touch with leadership. Because if we're going to be successful, and our young people are going to be successful, they've got to learn to be leaders, not managers. And the biggest downfall in our leadership has been technology. I remember when some people worked for me would come to me with an email and hand it to me and said, "Sir, read that. I don't like the tone of it." Sounds okay to me. I mean, what are you saying to me when you tell me you don't like the tone of something that's in words on a piece of paper? But see, that's what has gotten in the way of, very simply, leadership. And we got to get it back. And we got to start today. We got to start yesterday. And therefore, that's an important part of my book. And then I, of course, take that leadership and put it in reality when you talk about what took place in the streets of Mogadishu, Somalia. Political correctness. I am, without a doubt, the most politically incorrect person in America. Chapter 10 in my book is the only chapter that relates to Black Hawk Down. There's a whole lot more that went on over there. And I felt you deserved to know that. And that's the reason I chose to write it. I believe it was important that my 6 Rangers, my kids that died over there in the streets, I thought it was important that people really understand what they did and how important my kids were. Because that's what I call them. See, I was accountable for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If they got in trouble one night, it wasn't something I wasn't accountable. I was. That's the reason I use the word kids. They were my kids. I was blessed to command twice, and I believe anybody in here that's been in the military would agree with this. If you are privileged to command at the battalion level of about 900, in my case in Hawaii, and then 900 Rangers, that is the greatest level you can command at, because in my opinion, it's the last level that you can get down and get dirty. And I believe that. And I got to do it for 3 straight years. And my soldiers were my kids. I will never, ever forget each and every one of them and how they fought that day. I will never forget their families. Now, the fight that day, was it a tough day? Yes, it was. You will never hear me say, and Linda will vouch for this, I've never had a bad day, never had a bad day when I wore the uniform. Never. I had some tough days, but I never had a bad day. That was a tough day. We went out there that day to capture 2 key people that worked for Muhammad Farah Aidid, that most powerful clan leader over there. We had already captured his right-hand person, Osman Otto, in a vehicular convoy takedown. So we had Osman Otto, who was the financier, the money man for Aidid to get weapons and other people to fight for them. Other people that fought for them and fought with them and trained them came from a terrorist training camp in the country of Sudan that was run by Osama bin Laden. In October of 1993, there was a terrorist training camp in Sudan, documented and confirmed by the FBI. They helped fight against us over there, using RPGs to shoot and bring down helicopters. It was not a great technique. They were working on it there. And they did not shoot one RPG at those helicopters and knock it down. They probably shot 10 at one time, and one of them happened to hit the helicopter. That's the truth. So yes, we fought well-trained people over there. But that day, there was 21 people going to this meeting, and 2 of them were, 2 of the 4 left. that were right-hand people to a deed. And you know, if you take enough people out, the head guy gets really concerned and sometimes makes mistakes. Because that's how we got Saddam Hussein. When his 2 sons were killed in that building that day, people were much more willing to talk. And when those people that were searching for him, they had enough intel to know he was in one of those holes in the ground. I've had many people say to me about that, say, well, you know, how they were just lucky. I said, don't call it luck when they do something right. Give them credit where credit's due. And they knew exactly what they were doing. Because if they had not thought that he might be in one of those holes, they would not have stuck their head down in there looking around. They would have done one thing to clear it first. You pull the pin on the hand grenade, you drop it in, and then you see what's in there. So I tell people, give credit where credit's due to the people that put that together to get him. But that happened because people knew his sons were dead. And they were so afraid of them because they were brutal. Because why? They wanted to be in charge, and they were trying to impress Daddy every chance they got. Well, that's what we were trying to do. We were going to take 2 more out that day. That only left 2 lieutenants for a deed. He had 5. That meant we had 3 of them. You're on the way to mission accomplishment at that point. It was the right thing to do. Was it done in daylight at 3:30 in the afternoon? Yes, it was. Was it in the worst part of town? Yes, it was. But you know, bad guys tend to be in the worst parts of places, don't they? Because in talking to law enforcement, I love to look at them and I say, they give us a little heartburn about going to the worst part of town that day. And I'll have a law enforcement officer say, have you ever walked into the Marriott down the street here that I'm staying in and arrested anybody? No. Well, guess what? We haven't arrested any sunning on Cocoa Beach either. Bad people aren't in good places. Bad people are in bad places because they want to make it more difficult for the people that may be trying to get them. And that happens every day in our country, in your city, in my city, by great young men and women out there that are protecting us here at home. Well, that's all we were doing, folks. We were taking care of business, and it happened to be that way that day. And if you don't know, I'll tell you, we were that close to being finished. We had all the people captured. We were loading them on the vehicles that I was in command of so we could take them back. And when we did that, everybody would break down, we'd pick them up and head home. We were probably 3 minutes away from starting that loading out process and headed back when the first helicopter was shot down. Now, it's important to remember, we were supposed to capture 21 people that day, 2 key people. We captured 21 people, 2 key people. It seemed like that almost got lost in a lot of people's conversation about what went on over there. We accomplished the mission that day. We just had a bigger mission before the day was over because we then had to take care of our guys out there. And so that made it a little more challenging. But we did accomplish the basic mission we were given. That's the reason that if you saw the movie, and it comes out pretty clear there when I was on the radio talking back to the Operations Center, and I only talked to General Garrison maybe one time, in all honesty. I usually talked to his deputy commander, who at that time was a guy by the name of Colonel Jerry Boykin, who is now a retired 3-star, who I just spent Thursday and Friday with up in Panama City at a Wounded Warrior event. He was who I usually talked to. But I did talk to General Garrison in that little piece where they asked me, could I get to the crash site? And just so you know, they weren't talking about the first helicopter crash site, they were talking about the second one. Because they couldn't get anybody to the second one from the outside because of the way they had ambushes and roadblocks and everything set up. And my response was, because we'd already tried to get there, my response, and probably not in enough detail in the movie, was, I believe we can get there, but I don't think we should continue to do that. The reason I said that was because I had so many people wounded in my vehicles. you might not be able to put it in some context for yourself, but I'll try and help. Driving your vehicles through streets where there are people with RPGs on top of every building. There are people in every doorway and every window. And you're driving through with vehicles. And if one vehicle gets hit, it stops the whole convoy. It was really, really not the place you'd want to be. But we were there. I had a lot of wounded. I had some, of course, already killed. I'd been out of the vehicle enough that I sort of knew about all of that and the condition of people. I also knew that we were just about out of ammunition. And before you ask it, I'll answer. People say, why didn't you take enough? We had plenty, folks. You can only take so much. And when you end up doing what we had to do that day, it runs out. It really does. But you're going to get more because you're going to find a way to resupply. We were pretty much out of ammo. I had seriously wounded people, and I felt that if I continued to try to get to that helicopter, I would increase the number of KIA versus WIA enormously. Because I had been walking and seeing the people and how bad they were wounded. I felt the right decision was take everybody back in. The ones that needed to be taken care of, get that done. Rearm, refit, and head back out with the ones that could go fight. Plus, I could get those 21 bad guys back and get them out of my way. Because I still had them to take care of too and get back there. So that was sort of the decision point for me that was very important. We went back there and, you know, it was definitely a scene I don't think they could even put right in the movie, even though they tried. When you saw the wounded, the ones that were killed. Yes, there was a young man that had an RPG, hit him in the chest and stuck right there. I will tell you this, though, he was already dead. The first RPG that had hit that vehicle hit his door. That killed him. It blew the door. They fired a second one, and it impaled in him. But it was a dud, and or it wasn't powerful enough to make it go off. But he was already dead from the first one. Those things did happen. So we went back there and refitted. When we got ready to go out that night, when we finally got the Malaysians and the Pakis and the UN peace, helpful to us, that's another thing I'll tell you. The UN is the most worthless organization in the world. They're just useless, okay? Just useless, okay? They really are. They involve politics continuously with military ops, and that doesn't work. We've lived through that in our country. We know it. Many of you have been there in the 60s when we let politics get way too involved in military operations. But that's what we had to deal with over there a little bit. We didn't work for them, but they still were sort of in the way. Well, we needed them to help us get everybody out. Anyway, we did get everybody back in. Now, if you saw the movie shows that the actor that portrayed me went out with a convoy that night. I did not go out that night. That is corrected in my book, okay? Because like I told Mark Bowden, I would make it correct. No, I had been shot that day, as you probably know. And after a while there, I was in the operations center. We could see what was going on. And as a matter of fact, I was sitting there holding my IV up because the doctor that took care of me said I need an IV. And he said, we need you to sit down here for that. I said, no. I'm not sitting down. I said, can I carry it around? He said, that'll be okay. So probably look a little silly, but there I was walking around with an IV, I got in the operations center sitting beside the Judge Abbott general guy that was ours for special operations. Real good friend of mine because we've been in the Ranger Regiment as our lawyer too, and now he's special operations, joint special operations lawyer. We're sitting there, and his name's Dan Wright. And Dan looks over at me and he says, Danny, he says, you needed that IV, huh? I said, yeah. He said, well, just so you know, it's been empty for about 5 minutes. You might want to put it down. You look silly, okay? So I put it down. Well, when it was time to get everybody ready to go out, get in the vehicles to bring people back, I, like any of you that have served would do, I stood up, put my gear on, and started walking to the door. Colonel Jerry Boykin looked at me and he said, where are you going? I said, sir, I'm going to get in the vehicles to go out with the guys and bring everybody in. He said, no, you aren't. Now, he was full colonel, I was just lieutenant colonel. And I said, well, sir, I am, because those are my guys out there. I'm going out to make sure they all get back. He says, no, you're not going out. I said, sir. And he looked at me and he says, that's right, sir, so shut up and sit down. Ended that conversation. And Linda can tell you that's true because she's been around Colonel Boykin when he explained that. Now, he did clarify some things for me a few years later. We were having lunch with he and his wife, Ashley. And he says, you know, about me not letting you go out, I need to tell you the rest of that story. He said, when you came in that day, I went out, and was looking at everybody, and I went over and looked at your vehicle. He said, I decided right then you weren't going back out. The right front tire, the right rear tire were gone on my vehicle. My side of the windshield looked like target practice. Of course, my driver didn't have one round hit him. I'm not sure how he did that. He and I have discussed that, but I'm not sure how he did it, okay? I think most of you know, they know the guy sitting in the passenger seat in the lead vehicle is a leader, and that's who they want to take out, so that's understood. Colonel Boykin said he knew at that time that he was not going to let me go back out. He'd already made that decision. He said, I didn't need to be out there. And you know, as I look back on it, yeah, he was right, because for one thing, some of the people he had, one of them was a guy by the name of Eric Olson. Eric Olson, recently when he retired, he was the commander of all United States Special Operation Command soldiers in our military. Eric was my rank at that time. He also, after that, commanded SEAL Team 6. He was one of the finest people I've ever been able to associate with. So I guess when I looked at the people that he had, yeah, he didn't need me probably to go out and sort of get in the way and maybe not be totally coherent. I guess I wasn't as argumentative as I got with him. But you know, and that's what every one of us would do that were with our soldiers. You know that as well as I. It's what we do. You want them back and you want to make sure you're there to make sure they get back. So anyway, I did that. We got everybody back in. In a few days afterwards, and you know, we ended up getting everybody accounted for, even the ones taken from that second helicopter crash. I shook the hand of a young man by the name of Ian Gordon. His father was Master Sergeant Gary Gordon, Medal of Honor recipient, killed in Somalia. His son was 6 years old when Gary died. And there he was, assigned to B Company, 3rd Ranger Battalion. That was the company I had in Somalia. They asked his mother, Carmen, was it okay if they put him in that company? She said, I think that's exactly where he should be. Ian Gordon. Later that day, because activities went on, picnic and stuff like that, and Linda and I were standing there talking to some of my former Rangers and that were there as well. Somebody walked up behind me. I could tell. I'm like a lot of you still. I know you can tell when there's somebody there and you're not comfortable. And so I finished talking, and then I turned around, and here stood Ian. He was down in his tennis shoes, his blue jeans, T-shirt, and ball cap. And I said, Ian, I'm glad we got to see you again. I hope we get to talk a little more. See, he didn't talk much the first time because I'm an old battalion commander. They're not real comfortable with that, okay? But I said, I was hoping we get to talk a little more, and you know, maybe I get to spend some time with you. I said, are you going to be coming to the ball tomorrow night? He said, no, sir, I've got duty. I said, yeah, you young guys, you have to sit full duty, don't you? And so, you know, we chatted for a bit, and I said, well, is there something you wanted to talk about? He said, well, yes, sir, there is. I understand that you and my dad talked a lot, spent time together a lot over there. I said, yeah, we did. I never knew your dad before. But it just happens. You gravitate to somebody, and he and I gravitated each other. And he said, I was wondering, would you mind telling me a little bit about my dad over there and the things he did? That's all Ian wanted to know about was his dad. Ian Gordon's like his dad, and I would tell you that right now he's on his second enlistment in 3rd Ranger Battalion. And I tell you, in 2 years, I know where Ian Gordon's going to be. He's going to be in Delta Force just like his father. See, we have the finest young men and women the world's ever known taking care of us tonight while we're sitting here. See, I can't let go of it. It's part of me. It will be for the rest of my life. And in that I get the chance to share it with y'all, that makes it more special than anything in the world. That's my story, and I'm glad to share it with you. Bill?
Well done, sir. As the moderator, I have traditionally reserved the first and last question. So I'm going to ask the first one, and then we'll go to a pile here. A lot of people participating, and thank you for your questions. I have a sneaking suspicion, Colonel, that you may have given a couple of speeches in Afghanistan. Have you been there in recent years?
In the past year, I have made 2 trips to Afghanistan to visit and spend time with our troops. And the first one was back in September, October, a year ago, this past year. And that was a Ranger tour put together by a person who had the ability to do that, sponsored by the Armed Forces Entertainment people, not USO. And it was myself and 2 Rangers that used to were with me in 3rd Ranger Battalion. One of the 2 was in Somalia with me. And then a 4th Ranger from Vietnam era who was in the only Ranger National Guard company in the history of our armed forces, as directed by General Westmoreland to create one. And they did. And it was out of Greenfield, Indiana. Anyway, the 4 of us went. And we visited everything from being in Kyrgyzstan at Manas, the air station there where people go through and come out through, to being actually out in the field. I remember going to one of the FOBs, and when we got off the helicopter, and we'd flown for about an hour and 20 minutes, so it was a pretty good ways out to this one, and I was walking with the young man to where we were going to sit down and talk with him for a while, and I said, you know, this is absolutely awesome to be out here with y'all. He said, sir, you don't understand. It's more awesome for us that you're here because nobody's ever come out here before. I went, wow, that's what I wanted. It made a big difference to them. Then I was very, very fortunate, again, to go back in January, February of this year. I left on the 29th of January, arrived in Kabul on 31 January. I was there at the request of the command chaplain's office out of the ISAF headquarters over there to do the prayer breakfasts and prayer lunches for the troops. I thought that was a very special call that was made to me to go do that. They do it in February, even though our National Day of Prayer is in May, because the fighting is much calmer and they can really make that happen. Well, it was one amazing story after another. And in all honesty, the most amazing moment I had was when I was in the hospital at Kandahar, when they medevaced a young man in there. And when he came in, he was missing his left leg up to his hip because he stepped on an IED. Left arm was seriously damaged, and he was going to lose the right leg because it was shattered and he was bleeding out. His name was Private First Class Terrence Jones. The Navy chief was standing with me telling me about what they were doing and what they were going to do. When they got ready to move him to the operating room to do what they had to do as quick as they could get it done to get him headed to Landstuhl, Germany, to get him back here to the States, of course, he said, sir, would you mind saying something to him? I said, I don't mind at all. So I moved over to him. They stopped me for a moment. And I said, Private Jones, this is Colonel McKnight. The name's unimportant, but just remember this. We've talked here, and I'm going to talk to you when I'm back at Walter Reed on May the 4th. I want him to know he's going to live. The chief had told me he was going to live. He said he had a pulse. His eyes were open. When we said something to him, he responded to us. He's going to live. Now, this young man's lost his leg up to here. Well, I've kept up with Terrence. And we went to Walter Reed this past May the 4th. Losing both legs that high, one of the important things they have to learn to do is balance, because it's very, very difficult. And they teach them to be on one of those big exercise balls, and when they can finally balance there, they've got it. They said it normally takes about 3 months. It took about 2 weeks. I've got a picture on my little flip phone, a little video that Bo sent me. He's doing one-arm push-ups. Because, see, he's got a good right arm, but his left arm's in a halo right now because they're still trying to let it heal, but he's not going to lose that. And the thing Bo told us that was important to him was he loved to ride motorcycles. And that's tough when you don't have legs. He said, but they're modifying one for him. He said the moment he's waiting for is when he pulls up to a traffic light on his motorcycle with no legs. And he looks over at the people, and they're probably going, oh, my gosh. And he said, I'm just going to wave at them and be gone. Isn't that refreshing to think about what these young men and women can deal with? It's absolutely amazing.
What is your thought about the SEAL writing that book? What is your thought about the Secretary of Defense criticizing his writing the book? And since you can't get called back on active duty, give us your candid opinion.
Well, the easy part is the Secretary of Defense's comments. I don't really care what he says, okay? I care more about what we say, us that wear a uniform. And he's not wearing one right now, so I don't really worry too much about what he said. As you heard me say earlier, I chose not to speak about anything I did as long as I was in. I believe that is the right way to do it. I believe what he has written and what he said. I believe he knows what he's talking about. I don't question that. I just think he did it at the wrong time. Because you always have to be careful, because the way that comes out, of course, is bragging, if you want to call it that. And I believe the opposite, being very humble. Because as amazing it was, and they were so good at what they did, believe me, I applaud them because they got it right. Tomorrow, we could have the SEALs doing something and it could go bad. That's the reason I wish you wouldn't do it. Because you may have a good day today, but if you have a bad day tomorrow, somebody's going to say, see, you shouldn't be talking about those things. Because if you talk about them and brag about them, they can come back and haunt you. That's what bothers me.
You mentioned that Tom Sizemore is bigger than you are. Given the fact that he's bigger than you are, but he's not here, how do you think he did in the movie? 2 questions.
I have been asked, and this is, I guess, more directly to answer the question. How did Tom Sizemore come up with the way that he portrayed you? Did he portray you accurately? I asked him when I did meet him at his home 18 months after the movie came out, where did he come up with that way? He said, well, I called you those 2 times, and you answered my specific questions very succinctly to the point and hung the phone up. I said, yeah, I did pretty much. You asked a question, I answered it. He said, so you didn't really help me a lot in terms of how to portray you. So what I had to do was talk to your Rangers. I talked to your Rangers that were on the ground with you over there, because some of them did come to Morocco for the filming. Plus, we did spend 5 days with 3rd Ranger Battalion. The actors that portrayed Rangers did. A lot of that people don't know, but they did. And he said, so I just had to go find your people and talk to them. And I said, well, I'll have to take your word for that. And you know, I couldn't have given Tom Sizemore a really good perspective on what I did that day. Because you never watch yourself. Think about it. I could have told him what some of my sergeants did and some of my officers did and some of the Delta guys because I saw them. I couldn't have described what I did because I couldn't have looked back and tried to remember that. And I said, so what did they tell you? He said, the major comment that was made to me of what I tried to portray was that your leadership ability was exemplified by you being out there walking around from place to place, putting your hands on your shoulders, trying to make sure the right things were being done. He said, that's what I tried to portray. So folks, if you look at that movie and you think by any stretch of the imagination that, it was bravery walking around there and being shot at, no, it was just doing what I was trained to do. Because that is how we fight. And many of you sitting here know exactly that is correct. Because you will train the way you're going to fight, because you better, because you got to fight the way you train, folks. And that's what we did. I will take their word for it. I really will. It was more about making sure each and every soldier out there was doing the best thing they could do.
There are a number of questions that came in about what you would change were you running the operation. And some of them even talk about why you were denied, A, the platoon that you wanted to take with you on your first deployment, and then you came back the second day, the necessary heavy ordnance to protect your troops, and ultimately the decision by Secretary of Defense Les Aspin not to allow you to have tanks. Those are kind of put them all in one bag, and we can do 4 questions with one.
Okay. The first thing, the armor thing, that was not an impact on us per se because General Thomas Montgomery, who was the 2-star Army general, he was the deputy commander to the UN forces over there. He requested it to reinforce the UN forces, not for us. We had the 10th Mountain Division there out of Fort Drum, New York. There was an infantry battalion there that was the quick reaction force for the United Nations, belonged to them. There was an attack helicopter battalion on the airfield that belonged to the United Nations from the 10th Mountain Division. So there were other American elements there, yes. Our mission was totally separate for them. We didn't work for the UN, and the UN didn't tell us what to do. General Garrison informed General Montgomery when we were going to do a mission, usually about 60 seconds before we went. Why? Because we didn't trust the people up there. And if word got there too early, we were afraid they would be waiting on us, to be very honest about it. A lot of that has to be answered in this manner from where it began, not just the action and result itself. 3rd Ranger Battalion was at Fort Bliss, Texas, training for a special operations exercise. We jumped in on August the 3rd of 1993 to train up for this exercise. We were not even the Ranger Ready Force 1 battalion, the one that deploys on 18 hours notice. But on August the 10th, after all the things that did happen in Somalia happened, we were told at Fort Bliss that we have to go execute a real-world mission. We left Fort Bliss, Texas on August the 11th, not knowing what the mission was. We went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, linked up with Delta Force and Special Ops Aviation. On August the 12th, we started training for that mission. We were to deploy on or about August the 25th. On August the 22nd, we're ready to go. We have a few days to sort of rest and everything like that. But on August the 22nd, folks, the mission to Somalia was canceled. Now, if you've read my book, you already know that. You didn't know it if you read Black Hawk Down. You didn't know it from the movie. August the 22nd, the mission to Somalia was canceled. How many people ever heard that before? I've had 6 people since I've been speaking that really know that. And they were all in the Pentagon, amazingly enough. It was canceled, and we were told that we would return to Fort Bliss and join the exercise because things had changed. We go back to Fort Bliss, Texas. We are there about 10 hours. My boss comes down and says the mission's back on tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. Be ready to get on planes and go back to Fort Bragg. I did a lot of research with what I put in that book. I'll back up everything I put in there, and I have people to help me. Their names aren't used because I promised them I wouldn't do that. I protect them. But I know what's there. Anyway, that's politics. We go back to Fort Bragg. We get back to Fort Bragg, there was 2 decisions, and this is what I think Bill really wants to know. But you need to get there first at this point. 2 decisions that we got when we got back there because we had to go to a briefing, the leaders did. And the briefing was this. Decision 1, Task Force Ranger has been capped at 450 people. You cannot deploy with more than 450. If we had 450 or less, no big deal, right? We had 550. I had 1 full company and a platoon of 46 from my other company, Alpha Company. I had to leave all 46 of those others. Did that have an impact on October 3rd and 4th? You bet it did. Because they would have been our reserve, or at least a good piece of it, about half of them. And see, we couldn't get to that second helicopter crash because we had all 450 pretty well committed already. But if I'd had that other platoon, they would have fast roped on top of that second helicopter, and 5 of my friends, I believe, would be here with you tonight. The second decision, and you will read my book, I believe decisions are called 3 things. These are just my names for them: good, bad, and stupid. These are the stupid ones, the one that cost people their lives. The second stupid decision was the AC-130 gunship that many of us in this room know about. Big plane flies in the sky, shoots bullets on the ground really good. It was taken out of our package. We had trained for it. We were prepared to use it. In those days, early 90s, there was only 2 crews that really worked with special operations units. We had trained with one of them. It was ready. They cut it out of the task force package. Why were those decisions made? This is what we were told. The first one was they didn't want this to look like a build-up similar to Vietnam. The AC-130, they said they were worried about collateral damage. You know, that is something. You shoot at this chair, you may damage that chair a little bit and that one. You know what? If you can't accept that, don't put our armed forces in combat. Because that is reality, unfortunately. So we didn't have the AC-130. I know that if it had been up there that day, my 5 friends, Ray Frank, the co-pilot, Tommy Field, Bill Cleveland, the crew chiefs on the Black Hawk, and Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon would be here alive with you tonight telling you their story. And I'd rather them be in here telling you their story. But they're dead because of stupid decisions that impacted us. So yes, did it hurt not having that platoon? You bet it did. Did it hurt not having that AC-130? You bet it did. And I have no doubt in my mind my friends would be here with you.
Perfect segue to the moderator's last question, which is excerpted from several of yours. We've heard a lot, and we all believe in the phenomenal quality of the American men and women serving in our armed forces. And we have 2 presidents nearly in a row who have had no military service whatsoever. We have 1 president who has attended 29 out of over 100 CIA briefings. Why are more of our young men and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with these leadership qualities having been demonstrated in the toughest crucible there is on the planet, combat? Why are not more of them running for office and working through the chairs so that they, at some point in time, can recall their stories as Commander-in-Chief?
Well, the first piece of that I would say regarding your comments about the Commander-in-Chief, I strongly believe we need an amendment to our great Constitution that says to be the President of the United States of America, the greatest country on the face of the earth, and to be the Commander-in-Chief for the greatest armed forces that exists today, that person is only qualified when they have worn the uniform for at least 2 years. Active duty, Guard, or Reserve, whichever service, but for 2 years. They understand what it is to put a uniform on and lace the boots up. They would have a better understanding if they had to do that. I look at Ronald Reagan. I look at George Bush, the father. Just, you can go from, but you look at what they did. They understood what it meant. When you don't understand it, you don't understand the impact of what happens when it doesn't go right. I believe that is almost criminal. That's like a doctor that is a pediatrician conducting heart surgery. They're not qualified. And I believe our young men and women deserve the best of everything. Why are they not running for office? I'm sure a part of it, a lot of them are like me. They don't want to deal with it. I don't. Okay? I really don't. I believe I can have a bigger impact, in all honesty, doing what I'm doing across the country, and I have a blessing to get to do that. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take a tremendous turnover of the way people believe for us to change that political mind up here that exists out there. We have a really good congressman in our particular area where we live. Fortunately, Linda and I both have known his family for a long time. And he's Congressman Bill Posey. You may hear his name on occasion. Bill was a state congressman, then a state senator, and now he is a congressman in the House of Representatives. And I asked Bill not too long after he got back from his sort of first year up there and everything, and I happened to be at an event he was at, and I said, "Sir, I just got to ask you something." I said, "What's going on? I don't see anything changing. What are you doing?" And he says, I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm trying. But he says, let me tell you, out of 435 of them in the House of Representatives, there's about 35 of us that are willing to make changes. The other 400 aren't. That's the problem we have. So we've got to get a big change to take place, a big one. And we see now some here and there that are willing to take that step. And when they do, if they call me to support them, you bet I will. I will support the ones that I believe are the right ones for our country. But I don't see that change happen dramatically enough, because a lot of them, when they come back and they're missing an arm, they're missing a leg. Not only impacts them, it impacts a lot of people around them. It impacts their peers that were out there with them. So I think a lot of that carries over for a while. We may see it, but I think we're going to be quite a few years away from it. And I want to say this, and that's probably the last question, probably needs to be, but I will tell you this about our young men and women. They're coming home one day. We'll be back home one day. And everybody will be accounted for. But I ask you to remember this. When the last ones come home, regardless of what the service is, don't forget. Don't forget. We need to take care of them for the next 10 or 15 years, because they're going to be young men and women in our neighborhoods. They're not going to be in the military forever. Some of them are going to have tremendous challenges, and they're going to get out of the military and they're going to come back to where you and I live. We need to reach out to them. Do not let them be forgotten. And it'll be 10 to 15 years we have to do that. And I hope I'm around long enough to do it as much as possible. They are the greatest force ever in the history of the world. They are the second greatest generation in the history of the United States of America. We know the first. That's never changing. They will be identified by history one day as the second greatest generation in the United States of America. And I am proud to say that I know them and I love them dearly. Anything else?
No, sir.
God bless you and God bless America. Thank you.